This is what riding an e-bike can feel like for your child. So easy, so freeing. But what so many kids and parents don't realize is how quickly the whole thing can become very dangerous. E-bikes are exploding. Our kids want them. We, as parents, want to make our kids happy. So what do we do with this conundrum? Well, we try to take the facts and the data and make educated decisions so that despite being a seemingly trivial trip with your child going to his or her friend's house, at least you're armed with the data and understand what you need to teach your child to make that trip as safe as possible. If you're a nerd like me or into things like quantum physics, you know that world's all about probabilities. The likelihood of something happening or not happening. Well, we can't be with our kids every second of every day. But what we can do is figure out what are the riskiest things they're going to encounter on a day-to-day basis, in this case specifically with e-bikes, and try to arm them with the knowledge, arm them with the scare tactics, if you want to say that, arm them with all the things they need so they can make really good decisions when you're not there. And in some cases, you may need to enforce consequences if they're not following those rules that they need to follow. E-bike craze is really crazy, for lack of a better word. And we're talking an extreme amount of e-bikes being purchased just in the last couple years. So honestly, even a lot of the data that I came across in preparing for this podcast is older. You know, we talk about data from 2017, 2019. It's good data, but I don't think it really comes close to probably getting at the heart of some of the risk we're seeing in the last couple years in terms of some of the emergency room visits and other injuries that have happened with children on e-bikes. As an attorney, I have a lot of clients call me when their child has been struck by a car on an e-bike or lost control on a sidewalk, or in some cases the e-bike actually catches fire. And so I know anecdotally I'm seeing a lot of e-bike issues, and as that data catches up, we're going to learn more and more about the dangers of e-bikes here in 2026. So let's talk about the data that we do know. We know that 1.7 million e-bikes were purchased in 2024 alone, which was a 75% increase over 2023. We know that between 2017 and 2022, for micromobility devices in general, we're talking e-bikes, scooters, hoverboards, we had 360,000 ER visits. And we had 233 deaths during that time from just micromobility devices. Now we talk specifically about e-bikes. In that same time period, 53,000 e-bike related injuries, according to one national consumer safety study, and a 293% increase in injuries just between 2019 and 2022. And remember, we're not even getting into recent years data yet, from 24, 25, 26. So I imagine those numbers are probably higher at this point, unfortunately. And those statistics are from the U.S. only. So I'm not talking about worldwide statistics. It's just the United States here. And the most affected group, kids aged 10 to 13, who account for 44% of injuries in this overall class of e-bike injuries. And to make things worse, we're thinking about helmet use. A study found that kids are using helmets less on e-bikes than just on regular bikes or mopeds. And look, there's a real cultural problem amongst kids about wearing helmets. This ain't bicycle riding. Remember, this is e-bikes. Depending on what kind of e-bike your child has, those things can really cruise. I unfortunately have a client right now, or parents, their child just lost his life on an e-bike. A 10-year-old boy just lost his life on an e-bike. He was not wearing a helmet. A lot of things in this video could have saved his life, but number one, wearing a helmet. I know it's not cool, it's cringe, it's mid, it's corny, whatever they want to say, but you know what? If they don't do it, that's when you got to enforce consequences. Take away the video game console, take away the e-bike, take away the phone, ground them, whatever it might be. You're going to be hated for it probably. This ain't all glamorous being a parent. But we got to enforce consequences. It's not all fun. All right, we got to be portrayed as villains sometimes, but we're doing it for our child's safety. Well, look, I don't want to beat the helmet thing to death. We all get it. helmets are critical, especially on e-bikes because of how fast e-bikes can go these days. So let's talk about some other issues that can dramatically increase the risk for our kids. And one of those is maintenance. If there's an issue with the bike, maintenance-wise, a component is loose, the brakes aren't working, whatever it might be, on the e-bike, that dramatically increases the risk to our kids by as much as 11 to 12 times the risk of an injury because of a maintenance issue. So the kids need to know, unless they're super handy and they can fix it right in the spot, take that bike home safely, don't use the motorized portion of it, or walk it home. Another thing that can dramatically increase risk is using the phone. And look, all the kids are carrying phones these days. I get it. But just like we try to avoid using the phone while we're driving, the kids need to avoid using the phones while they're using the e-bikes. And this even goes for at intersections. It's common. You see around the kids stop at intersections, they're looking down at their phone. But even that is valuable time to be looking around as a child, scanning for potential dangers and scanning ahead to where they're going next. So be very wary of phone use and training the kids on that while they're riding e-bikes. And then lastly, time spent on the bike. Now, again, this is tough because we didn't buy the e-bike for our kids for them to spend 10 minutes on the e-bike a day. That's not practical. I get that. But there is interesting data showing that the more time you spend on the e-bike, we talk about getting into the hour and hours of time per day, the risk really dramatically rises, 11 times more risky once we get past an hour of time. So you take that for what it is, but the more time, the more danger. And of course, we can use practical common sense. Is a child tired? Is it after practice? Are there times where we should be more aware of when a child shouldn't be driving the e-bike because he or she may be more tired than normal? Being tired aside, really a lot of this is psychological, right? Does a child view himself or herself as someone who takes risks or someone who rides safely? How does he value safety, or how does she value safety? How does he or she understand risk, and how do they feel when you watch them ride? Are they riding easy, locked in, helmet on, steady, or are they weaving between lanes, laughing, looking at their phone? A lot of this is based psychologically, how they view themselves as pillars of safety. And again, the kids are going to have fun. They want to hang out with their friends. They want to laugh and all that. But really, there's some interesting studies out there showing the way a child views this. That they have a strong inner rules about being safe and being a safe rider. That can really make a dramatic difference, as much as 30 to 50% difference in the risk of injury. So overall, these kind of beliefs are hard to instill, right? We can sit down with a child and lecture him and, be viewed as just another adult telling him or her what to do and kind of get lost in the noise. That's where we have to be creative in our storytelling. We tell them stories. I mentioned today a child that unfortunately lost his life on e-bikes. There's YouTube videos. There's pictures. There's you. There's you using your passion. Take a moment. Imagine what it would be like if your child was seriously injured in an e-bike accident. But get into that mind space before you talk to your child. I know that seems hard, but then when you talk to the child, they're going to see the emotion in your eyes. They're going to see maybe the tears in your eyes. They're going to see how serious this is. This is serious business. So don't think just a simple lecture is going to do the job. The children need to be communicated in a way more than just words. They need the story. They need the emotion. They need the passion. Now, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention a couple things about depending on where you live, whether you live in the city or out in the country. If you think that cities are more dangerous, you'd be right, because the most dangerous thing for the child is making contact with other vehicles, cars and trucks, intersections, or riding on the side of the road and getting sideswiped. Those are happening more often in cities. But in rural areas, those kind of things are happening too, because remember, in rural areas, there's no outlet for the child. There typically isn't bike lanes. There typically aren't sidewalks out in the country. So you have less places to ride an e-bike safely out in the country, although, of course, there's less number of cars that pose potential dangers. In the cities, if the child can ride on the sidewalk, that's much better. Now, look, sidewalks have their own set of problems. They're bumpy. There's kind of sometimes some branches on there or something that can cause little crashes. And quite frankly, I get a lot of calls about little crashes by children and adults riding on the sidewalk, and they're upset because there was a big bump in the sidewalk or whatnot. But everything I've seen, at least in my practice, has been pretty minor injuries when that happens on the sidewalk. Whereas the serious injuries I've seen have been because children are riding on the street or crossing a street, and that's where there's mistakes that happen. Either the child makes a mistake, or when a car or truck makes a mistake and doesn't pay attention or runs a stop sign or something along those lines. So takeaway here is, if you live in a rural area in the country, make sure you're still thinking about safety for your child, because there are less places for he or she to be able to ride in terms of dedicated bike lanes or sidewalks. And I'll mention eyesight, vision real quick too. It seems like obviously common sense, but get your kids' vision checked every year. Kids may not realize they may be squinting, or they may just get by, and their vision is not 20/20 anymore. Obviously, it's important to have great vision, especially when you're riding at high speeds on an e-bike. So I highly recommend that. There's a lot of kids and, quite frankly, adults are out there with lackluster vision when they really need to be getting their eyes checked and getting glasses or contacts to help them through those situations. So let me wrap up with this. Your child doesn't know what your child doesn't know. Okay? When we think about teaching our kids, we think about driving, right? We go out to an empty parking lot when they're 16. We teach them how to parallel park. And then we think, okay, we'll take them driving a couple times. After that, they're good to go, ready for their license. Well, they're riding an e-bike right now, which in some cases can go about half as fast as a car can go. And so we have to think of it. We have to rethink how we're teaching our kids about the road and traffic and all that. If they have an e-bike, they're 10, 11 years old, then we need to be teaching them like they're 16, 17, about to get their license for their actual real vehicle. We need to be teaching them about traffic safety, about stoplights, traffic control devices, yield signs. Where is there a bumpy part in the road they got to watch out for? Is there a dangerous intersection here we have to be careful of and be very, very aware of our surroundings? Where are the spots in terms of cars that tend to not look, maybe at a yield sign or something like that? There's lots of different ways to be able to look at this world that we're so used to as adults now. We've been driving for, in some cases, 20 years. We have to be able to look at this and understand from a child's perspective, they don't know what they don't know. So let's take some time and treat them, if they're going to get an e-bike, like they're about to get their license. All right, and really arm them with the knowledge. Take them out riding, make them answer your questions for you. And you'll be happy and glad you did everything you could to lower that probability of risk and make sure your children stay safe.